Those are the hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on CareGiverSolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to CareGiverSolutions.info show. I am so glad that you could join us today. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida, and we have another great program for you today. I had the opportunity to meet a wonderful doctor a few months ago, and he's going to be our guest. But before we get to him, I want to let everybody know that if you're joining us on local Southeast Florida radio, that's great. You might be listening to us on the iHeartRadio app at WNN 1470, or maybe even tuning in to the website CareGiverSolutions.info. However you are here, welcome. This show is for caregivers. If you're a seasoned or experienced caregiver and you've been in the trenches of caregiving for quite some time, or maybe you're a caregiver who just was born. In other words, it was thrown onto you, something that you didn't expect, and you're very new at caregiving. Whichever the scenario is, this show is right for you. This is an educational program that we bring to you every single week, Tuesdays from 5 to 6 p.m., to help you, the caregiver, to navigate through the difficulties of caregiving, because caregiving is difficult. People need to know things that sometimes you don't get to read in a book. And that's why we bring specialized experts to you on this program, where I can ask the questions that if you had the opportunity to be here, you would want to ask questions of elder law attorneys, of doctors, of psychiatrists, of people in the legal field, people in the financial field like elder law attorneys, social workers, geriatric care managers, all the pieces of the puzzle of the team that you need to put into place if you're going to be a successful caregiver and be a caregiver who doesn't get too stressed out doing your duties. So all of this is for you, the caregiver, to learn, to find out what you need to know, hopefully before you need to know it, so you can be prepared. Because preparation and being prepared is key when it comes to caregiving. So a few months ago, I was over near Clearwater, Florida, in Largo, and I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Todd Knudsen. And he is a neuropsychiatrist, and he has graciously accepted to come onto this program today to talk about his expertise, which is the brain, and how the brain works, and talk about dementia and Alzheimer's, and talk about what's in the future, what we can do, what we're doing now, what we can do in the future. And so I'm so happy that he's joining us live from Largo, Florida, on the phone. Dr. Knudsen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. We have your picture up on the screen so everyone can see you. And thank you for calling and joining us. Your time is so valuable, but you have so much to offer. So I've been very excited to have you come onto our program. So let's just get right into the nitty-gritty, because I know you love to talk about the brain, and you have a lot to say, so we want to get right into it so we don't miss a thing. So let's talk about the brain and specifically Alzheimer's and dementia and how that affects the brain. A lot of people don't understand the differences in the different dementias, so maybe you could touch a little bit on that. But go ahead and share with everyone what you would like to share about the brain and about how it is affected with this disease.
I think the first thing that would be useful is to describe what dementia is from a medical perspective and how that differs from other brain diseases. Dementia is a description of the symptom of having problems forming and accessing memories. There are many things that go along with that disability, behaviors and emotions. But when we are diagnosing someone with dementia, what we're saying is that there is a difficulty with either retrieving or forming new memories. And that kind of description of the global problem includes many different physiologic or pathologic processes. And so with Alzheimer's dementia specifically, the thought that is, when we look at the brain under a microscope, we see these plaques that are in between neurons and these tangles within neurons. And the thought is that one or both of these problems is what prevents the accessing and forming of memory. Oftentimes when people have Alzheimer's dementia, there is a mixed dementia where the brain is injured not just by that disease, but also by hypertension, high blood pressure, plaques in the arteries that can cause mini strokes, and that's called vascular dementia. And so in Alzheimer's disease, the memory is probably still stored. It is just physically prevented from being accessed by these plaques of proteins that shouldn't be in the brain. Whereas in vascular dementia, with small strokes and things like this, the memory is probably lost. That the reason that the memory can't be retrieved is that the cell that is actually holding it has died, as opposed to the cell that's holding it simply can't physically be accessed by the rest of the brain.
Wow, I really like that take on it. I've never heard a physician describe it that way, that it may be still there, it just can't get retrieved because it's blocked, as opposed to being dead. We've always heard about the cells always dying, but I like what you said, that perhaps they're still there, and maybe in the future we can figure out how we can unblock that, which will be part of our talk later today. But I think that's really great that there is hope from what you said, that there is a possibility of maybe unblocking that so we could get the memories back sometime in the future, right?
Absolutely. That's the goal of current research, to find a way to dissolve those plaques or prevent them from forming, so that the parts of the brain that seem to be blocked off can be accessed again.
Wow. So now with the dementia that you described, and there's different kinds, as you said, Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and so many more, how important is it to a person to get a proper diagnosis, and more than that, how important is it to find out which type of dementia you have? Because is there different ways of treating different kinds of dementia?
I think that absolutely it's important to have a concept of what physiologic or what pathology is in the brain in order to guide treatment. If we are just saying someone has dementia, it doesn't necessarily follow that the same medications, even that we have now, are useful in treating all forms of dementia. So for example, the entire brain has somewhere between 80 and 100 billion neurons. The vast majority of those, 99.99% of them, talk to each other with a molecule called acetylcholine. And that is a molecule that we can give people a medication. One of them is called Namenda, that helps bolster that communication. So early in the disease of Alzheimer's, that medication can help people function more like themselves and delay the progression of the disease.
So that's why it's important, because you
Oh.
want to start early, right? You want to find out what it is to get, try to get ahead of it a little bit.
Exactly, and also that if someone's dementia is actually being caused by something else, say having multiple small strokes that are actually what's impairing their ability to form new memories, and they're losing some of their brain capacity due to those. If they are misdiagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia, the opportunity to really control that process, to find out what's going on in their heart and their vascular system, to stop those small strokes from happening, it is lost.
Wow. So you have quite a history. I read your bio, and you have a lot of experience with the brain, but in a different kind of a setting, and a lot of it may have been due to trauma to the brain. So if you would like to share some of those experiences that you have, and what happens when there's trauma to the brain, and how is the trauma, like a physical trauma to the brain, causing memory loss different from an organic type of cause?
Yeah, absolutely. The short answer is actually very similar to Alzheimer's dementia. There's a lot of overlap. But I was a physician in the Army and a psychiatrist in the Army. I was in Iraq and Afghanistan. And the soldiers that I treated there, each war seems to have a new health threat. And especially in Iraq, there was a new health threat from very large explosions that were being detonated to try to destroy our soldiers by the enemy in armored vehicles. And the armor was strong enough that the soldiers were healthy inside. They were not. They often did not have a physical injury. Some of them did. Sometimes the armor was penetrated. But even for soldiers who appeared healthy, that blast pressure damaged their brain. And that damage comes from sending a shock wave through the brain. The brain is very similar in consistency to like a creme brulee or a custard. And so you can imagine something like that, a custard being near an explosion. There are these ripples of energy that move through the brain, and those can actually shear off the neurons in their connections. They're even smaller than the cell body itself, but these very thin connections between each neuron. And those can be sheared off, and where they shear, they do form a plaque that is similar to Alzheimer's disease. And so, just like in Alzheimer's disease, soldiers who had this injury found that they had personality changes, found that they had difficulty with memory, found that they felt just not like themselves in ways that were subtle, but noticeable to them and noticeable to the people who cared for them. And so that's how I, became more and more interested in neuropsychiatry. Was helping the soldiers that I cared for cope with these new personality changes that they were experiencing, and how we could, at some point in the future, find some way to help them regain that function and prevent it from progressing.
Wow. Very interesting to hear that about the shock waves affecting the soldiers inside the armored tank. So perhaps, they weren't physically affected, but their brain was affected. And we're, like you said, probably getting more and more of that seen. So our soldiers are being affected in a lot more ways than I think a lot of us ever even thought about.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty scary stuff. Well, we're going to take a quick first commercial break, and when we come back, Dr. Knudsen's going to be sharing more of his experiences and expertise. So stay right with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410
The inability to recognize the
for
obvious
additional
often
information
occurs with
about any
Alzheimer's,
of the unique services
particularly among
Arden
the
Courts
family members
provides.
who care for them.
Hi,
When
I'm
the
Michael
time
Moore,
comes
owner
for
of
you
Senior
to
Helpers of
decide
South
that
Palm
someone
Beach.
you love
Senior
needs more
Helpers is
help
dedicated
than
to
you can
provide.
give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts,
Share a story. Call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. My special guest today is Dr. Todd Knudsen. He is a neuropsychiatrist over in Largo, Florida, and he is joining us via the telephone. Again, welcome, Doctor. So happy to have you with us today.
It's wonderful to be with you.
Great. So we are talking about the brain and how the brain can be affected, not only with diseases, but as we just found out, our soldiers in the Army, having shock waves through their brain when they're attacked by the enemy inside an armored tank. So much to learn and so much to know. So your position as a neuropsychiatrist, if someone was suffering with dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, when and how would your services be needed? Is there a certain time that a person such as yourself would need to step in to intervene in a person's care as a neuropsychiatrist? Explain that, please.
So I specifically work with a medical group, Legacy Health, and we work together as wound care specialists, as internal medicine specialists, as me as a neuropsychiatrist, to help bolster the health of patients who are moving into assisted living or into long-term care. And one of the useful things I can do at that transition is for caregivers, or for the caregiving family. We were talking a little bit about how there is a similarity in the physiology of we call mild traumatic brain injury and Alzheimer's disease. That there's a parallel, I think, between also the post-traumatic stress disorder that I used to help soldiers with, and what family members go through when their loved one is moving into a long-term care facility.
Wow, please explain that. That
yeah,
sounds
yeah.
interesting.
That is inappropriate guilt. That in as people are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, a very common feature of that is holding on to a belief that I should have done something different. I should have done this. I should have known something that was impossible to know. And what I find with families as their loved one is going into long-term care is that there's a similar inappropriate guilt that families feel that they should be able to care for their loved one at home, and that that this is something that they are doing something wrong, or that somehow they should have some capacity that's not possible for them to have. And challenging that belief and helping families to recognize that there is a point in the progression of this disease that it is simply not safe for someone with this disease to be outside of long-term care. We met at Arden Courts. That is a beautiful facility that is incredibly well engineered to allow people to live with this disease in a way that is helpful for them, and that they can find meaning in their life even without the ability to access or form these memories. That's something that's not possible to create at home. Our larger world is very dangerous to people who have dementia, and there's no way to engineer the world around us so that it would be safe for someone with dementia to live in, especially very, very profound dementia.
Right. Well, I like the topic of the guilt because just this week I met with a daughter whose mother is in her 90s, and the daughter lives out of state, and the mother lives in Florida, and the mother has around-the-clock care at home. But yet these are caregivers that at best probably have CNA, certified nursing assistants, training. They're not nurses. They're not real medical. They're just there to make sure that the mother is safe, feed her. And this has been going on for years. And the daughter has a sister who is suffering with cancer in another state. And every time there's an issue with the mom, the caregivers are calling the well daughter, who is really not so well anymore because she's very stressed out, and calling her and telling her, this is what we see, this is, what she's complaining about. Should we take her to the hospital? Should we take her to the doctor? So she's trying to make these decisions from thousands of miles away. So the daughter decided that perhaps it would be better for mom to come into a memory care community where she would be getting things that she's missing. And a couple of those missing things, number one is socialization with her peers, because she's just with these younger people who are caring for her. So she's not really getting appropriate socialization with her peers, and probably not getting enough stimulation to engage her both physically and mentally. So the daughter decided that this would probably be a good thing, and obviously it would alleviate a lot of stress on her. So she flew to Florida, and I met with her, and it was very interesting how once the situation became more of a reality to the daughter, where she was faced with making that decision, she froze. And she actually admitted that she was emotionally paralyzed. And I got her to talk to me about that. And I said, well, what is it that you're feeling? And she said, guilt. So I love, doctor, that you brought this subject up, because this is exactly what happens with so many spouses and so many adult children and others who are responsible for making that tough decision. And you called it inappropriate guilt, which I love that too, because we have to explain to them, yes, you feel guilty, there's reasons, but look at it on the deeper side. So why should somebody not have those guilt feelings, or should they have them, and should they acknowledge them and move on, or are they going to let this guilt prevent them from making a decision like this particular lady I'm talking about?
I I think it's very useful to talk about why we feel guilt. It is unusual that guilt is appropriate. I would say more often than not it is inappropriate. And that's because we make the decisions that we do in life based on the information we have at the time. This is especially true in guilt with PTSD. And so new information will become available later. And if that makes it seem like a poor decision was made in the past, we put this feeling on ourselves that, well, I should have known that, even though it was not possible for us to know that. Or I should have been able to do that, even though it is not possible for us to have been able to do that. I think that part of the guilt that family members feel is that there is a belief that this is that allowing someone else to care for our loved one, somehow that if that makes our lives easier, that's not right. That we're supposed to always choose the course that makes things more difficult for us, not recognizing that the reason that as this disease progresses, it's difficult for everyone, is that the environment at home is simply not the right place for someone with very advanced Alzheimer's dementia. You hit on a very important point of socialization, that if you could exactly recreate the staff of, say, Ardencourt in your house, it would still be very difficult for the person suffering with dementia to look around and say, everyone is younger than me, everyone seems to have abilities that I don't have. Even if they're unable to articulate that, to speak, or to, in their own mind, formulate what that problem is, they notice that there's something about them that is different than everyone else around them. And that makes it hard to live. Whereas if everyone in the facility is, has the same problem, we identify with people who have the same problem as us. And that's even more fundamental to what it is to be human, to identify with the people, than language or memory or the ability to do math or carry out our active daily living. That is really fundamental to who we are as people. And so it's important that if we are going to have meaning in our life, throughout our life, that we are in an environment where that's possible.
To make that connection.
Right.
Yeah, it's connecting with people. I mean, maybe our neurons and synapses are not connecting so well because we have the Alzheimer's, but the connection with people can definitely add to quality of life. So I think that is very important part of it. What about a person who says, oh, well, my mom's not like those people? And we hear that a lot, and it's something common that you have a parent, a mom, a dad, and maybe that person is on a walker, but you go and see different places as possible communities to move in, and there's other people walking, but there's also people on walkers, and then there's also maybe many in wheelchairs because they've declined. It's progressive disease, as we know. My mom, my dad, they're not like those people. They wouldn't like to be here if they saw people in wheelchairs. Now, in your professional opinion, is that really going to affect the person that's coming in on a walker that has Alzheimer's to see somebody else perhaps in a wheelchair? Or is that going to be something that they may make a connection because they still have some empathy or sympathy? What do you think?
I think that empathy piece is critical. That each of us know in our own lives that as we deal with problems, two things that are helpful to us, that help us manage our own emotions and our own feelings about our own difficulties, are first altruism, the ability to say, I have my own troubles, but I'm still able to do something for someone else. So being in an environment where maybe you are more functioning better than someone else in the same facility, that connection that we have is that people say, well, I can do something for, Bob. He has it worse than me. And
Right,
that
and-
is actually very comforting to anyone.
Yeah, I've seen that actually, where a higher functioning resident takes somebody less than under their wing, and it gives them a sense of value, of worth, of being a supportive person, validating, maybe why they're there. And a person who comes in that sees others less than them, that could actually say, like you said, well, yes, I am not as good as I used to be, but at least I'm not like that, or I can still do this, which actually should or could give them a good feeling, as opposed to what a lot of families think would bring them down. So I thought from your opinion, how that would work. So thank you for explaining that, because I've always thought it was a good thing to not be secluded with just like others, because I think we're missing some of those connections as a human being that we could make ourselves feel better in the process, right?
Right, and I think when a family member says that, perhaps the larger message is that family member saying, I'm not ready to confront the reality that this is a progressive disease, and that what I see for this other patient or a resident is a future for my loved one.
Exactly, and that, I think you hit the nail right on the head with that, because they maybe have some of that denial still going on within themselves and don't want to see that future, even though that future is inevitable with this disease. I think you're absolutely right.
And completely understandable. Who would want to confront that and acknowledge that if there was a way to avoid acknowledging it?
But it's hard. It's part of life. I mean,
Right.
what we all go
Right.
through, everybody goes through something in life. I mean, it's never always, a bed of roses every day, every year of our life. We all have trials and tribulations.
Exactly. I think that is how we deal with those is what gives our life meaning, and that's an important part of psychiatry, is that we help patients give meaning to the problems that they face in life, and find ways to take meaning from those problems. And as we kind of discussed earlier, that allowing someone to live in a community where other people have a similar problem allows that person to have that meaning, and keeping them isolated from other people who have a similar problem denies them that opportunity. I don't think anyone would any family member would want to feel like their disease, their dementia, was creating a difficult home for their family members, especially when it would be possible for them to be in a community with other people who have dementia, and find comfort in that community.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity, but they don't see it as an opportunity. And I think it's the way they're processing this, and the guilt is coming from that they don't see it as something they're doing for their loved one, but they're doing to their loved one. And I think if they change that one little word from to the word for, I think it would enlighten the whole situation. So
Absolutely, and that conversation is something that I think is useful to have is useful for specifically neuropsychiatrists to have, because in my training I have both the psychiatric aspect of family therapy, and then the ability to explain what the biologic process is that their family member is going through.
Yeah, very, very important. Well, thank you. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment, more with Dr. Todd Knudsen, so stay tuned.
The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts.
Feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teal, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our national sponsor of the show, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts has around 50 communities throughout the United States, and 10 of those right here in Florida. Arden Courts is a leader in memory care for people suffering with memory loss, such as Alzheimer's and other types of dementia. They also love to be a resource for caregivers. As such, they're offering this free book to you just for watching the show. You can call our toll-free number, which is 888-478-2410, to receive this free book. It's called The 36-Hour Day. It's a wonderful resource for caregivers. It has a lot of information, explanations, tips on caregiving. I would highly recommend this book if you are a caregiver or know of a caregiver who would benefit from this. All you have to do is call that number, tell them that you heard about the free offer on the Caregiver Solutions info show, and they'll get your name, address, and make sure that they get one mailed right off to you. So give them a call today at 888-478-2410. My guest today is Dr. Todd Knudsen. He is a neuropsychiatrist. He is actually board certified in by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, as well as the American Board of Preventive Medicine. And he's joining us live today from Largo, Florida, where he practices with Legacy Health Medical Group. And Dr. Knudsen, this has been an intriguing talk with you as we're talking about the brain, how the brain functions, what happens when it's traumatized. So we're going to continue our talk now and shift gears a little bit about what you think might be coming down the pike. How are we going to, stop this from happening? I know there's a lot of research going on, a lot of trials on the drug, clinical trials. Do you have any insight into what might help us either now or in the future with this terrible disease?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I think is going to be most useful to the audience of caregivers is to assure them that this is, I come from a prevention background, like you said. I used to work at the Centers for Disease Control as someone who studies the spread of diseases in populations. And this is a disease that can be prevented. We are learning more and more about how to prevent Alzheimer's. And so many people who have family members with Alzheimer's recognize that there is a genetic component to this disease, that having a family member with Alzheimer's means that you are at greater risk for developing it yourself. And many caregivers are giving care to a mother and a father, or two grandparents that have Alzheimer's disease, and that carries an even greater risk of developing Alzheimer's. And so focusing on what caregivers can do now to lower their risk in the future, I think is an important topic for us to discuss. The first is that there is excitatory neurotoxicity in the brain, so that being stressed, under chronic stress, actually kills brain cells. And so when caregivers feel that they're facing that 36-hour day, that they are overwhelmed, there is a physical cost to that that is damaging the brain. And so that's an important consideration when we are deciding whether or not it's time for a loved one to go, to join an assisted living facility or a long-term care. That the caregiver is going to have to live the rest of his or her life to provide care to other people, to care for him or herself, and that can't come at the cost of them putting themselves at risk for dementia in the future.
Right, because they say stress can kill.
Yeah, and it absolutely does. It absolutely causes the brain to shrink. It specifically causes the parts of the brain that we need to bolster to prevent Alzheimer's to shrink. That's the frontal lobes, the very front top portion of the brain that allows us to kind of think about our own thoughts, to direct our actions, to make good decisions. A very small portion of the brain that allows us to do that, and it is the most affected by stress. The other useful research that is available now is that there is a fairly simple diet that dramatically lowers the risk of Alzheimer's. It's called the MIND diet. It's capital letters MIND. It's a clever play on words. It's a combination of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet for lowering high blood pressure. This combination diet is incredibly effective at preventing Alzheimer's disease.
And how does the diet help?
It's a very simple diet to follow. It cuts out almost completely some foods, especially pastries and cheese, are kind of completely cut out. Other foods can be used sparingly, like red meat, but it's primarily a diet focused on leafy green vegetables and fish. It does include red wine, so it's not cutting everything out, but it's a diet that's simple to follow. It's like it lays out, eat so many servings of this per week, eat fewer than so many of this per week, and the finding was that it's very effective in preventing Alzheimer's disease. Also, managing high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, these all have a chronic negative impact on the brain and seem to allow those plaques and tangles that we talked about earlier to form more easily. And so throughout our lives, if we are focusing on creating a healthy body for our brain to swim in, basically, we are much less likely to develop this disease in the future.
So you mentioned cheese. Is that because of the high salt content in cheese?
Well, it's the the total physiology of that diet is not completely understood. This is a retrospective study based on patients who had Alzheimer's versus people who did not develop Alzheimer's, where there's a large enough survey to look back in time and see what they ate as part of a very large ongoing study, and say that these foods seem to be associated with Alzheimer's and these seem to be associated with preventing Alzheimer's.
Well, when you think of cheese, it's kind of sticky and gooey and stringy, and you kind of then get the picture of all these plaques and tangles in your brain. It kind of makes sense, like avoid the cheese, and that'll help with all that in the brain. And I know the red wine is great because it's got the antioxidants and flavonoids in it. So I'm glad to hear that wine is not off the table, personally.
So to speak.
Yeah.
And so then what we're talking about going forward, it is possible that there will be a vaccine for Alzheimer's, that we will be able to encourage our own immune system to identify these plaques and tangles and use our immune system to remove them from the brain. That is one focus of future research. Another is combining a multi-kinase inhibitor. It's a type of medication that's often used in the treatment of cancer with a very powerful antioxidant, and using those in combination to have the cells in our brain that are kind of in between life and death. They're called semi-senescent cells, or if you Google zombie cells, that's how the popular press refers to them. And these cells in our brain just kind of get in the way. And so encouraging them to move into cell death, we call it apoptosis, and leave the brain, allows the rest of the brain to function more effectively. And that's a study right now that's going on at the Mayo Clinic, and is seeing some encouraging results.
Well, wouldn't that be wonderful if it was just an injection and they would come up with that? That would be tremendous. How far in the future do you think we're away from getting something like that?
I don't. Far enough that I would not. I doubt that it will be available to anyone who has the diagnosis now, in a way that helps them recover. I think that it is within the lifetime of people who are caring for those with Alzheimer's disease, so that, again, even if they have a high degree of genetic loading for Alzheimer's disease, that the treatments in the future, combined with focusing on prevention now, will ensure that they do not have to suffer with Alzheimer's disease. Someday this will, I believe that we will understand the brain well enough to not only prevent these diseases or stop them from happening, but maybe even augment the brain so that, it is easier for me to learn the piano, which I have never been able to do. I don't know if that's in my lifetime or not, but I do believe it's in the future for us as a people.
Well, that's very encouraging. I mean, we can say there's hope, and we can always hope, and we can do the right things to try to prevent the disease in our own lives. You mentioned the stress, so we want to reduce the stress, of course. You mentioned diet. How important is exercise? What does it play in its part to prevent this disease?
Yeah, fundamental to everything in our health. That a 20-minute walk a day in the morning may be the best medicine there is in life. It prevents high blood pressure. It promotes brain growth. It reduces stress. And it's very easy to tell people that. And I look back on my week and know I did not really get any exercise. So I want to recognize, as I tell people how important exercise is, that it is actually very hard in our society and the way we live to incorporate it into our life. But if there was one thing that I think would be, okay, if there were two things, the first thing is don't smoke cigarettes. I don't think there's anything more damaging to our health than doing that. And so after that, getting some daily exercise is the next most important thing.
Yeah, it's good for your heart, which is good for your brain, right? There's a correlation between heart health and brain health.
Right, that our brain is probably the most sensitive organ to any disturbance in our body. So, if we if our blood is not circulating well, the first thing to be affected is our brain.
Well, it's very interesting, and I think you're right. Sometimes it's easier said than done for people to incorporate the special diet, the exercise, some of the things that we could do, but we need obviously to make it a priority because now the baby boomers are aging and they call it a silver tsunami coming, and with that, more and more people are being diagnosed with different forms of dementia and Alzheimer's. So we really need to keep on our bandwagon and keep preaching that to people so that we can all be healthier and be there for others. One of the things that I always tell caregivers is that you need to, care for yourself, because even if you have your loved one in a community where someone else is caring for them, ultimately that spouse or that adult child is still a caregiver because they're still making decisions for that person. And they need to be there. They need to be healthy so they can continue to be in that person's life to make those decisions and oversee everything. And people sometimes forget that even though you might not be hands-on 24/7 with that person, you are still a caregiver, right?
Oh, absolutely. And having a family member involved makes a huge difference. That the ability to have someone advocating for us if we have dementia is important, no matter what environment we're being cared for in. And it also when family members are close enough to visit, it's a huge improvement for the person that they love to be able to spend time with their family focused on spending time rather than focused on helping with active daily living.
Getting back to being the wife, or
right.
getting back to being the husband
Right.
instead of the caregiver.
And as a psychiatrist, something I think that it's important for family members to know is that because this is a disease where people can't form declarative memory, they can't say, my wife was here yesterday. Sometimes family members think that they don't get any benefit from visiting. But we talked about almost all the brain works on acetylcholine. The parts of the brain that give us our mood and our emotions, those are the handful of neurons that act on other neurotransmitters. And so the positive benefit of feeling happy and joy and that is preserved even after the memory is gone, so that people's mood is improved measurably and physiologically by being visited by family members, even without being able to remember that they were there. That improvement in mood carries on for days and weeks without them being able to say, I saw such and such yesterday.
Right. I love that. That's a very good point. The dopamine and the serotonin and all those kinds of things.
Right.
I've always said that, if a person doesn't remember, but they know that you belong to them because somehow it's a feeling. And I personally, I don't know if there's any studies to back this up, but in all the 18 years I've been working with families and dementia-related issues, I've always said that I think their feelings that, from the heart, their feelings, their emotions sometimes increase when the brain decreases, that somehow those emotions make up for the deficit in the brain.
Yeah.
And you just said that in your own words, which I think is really, really important for those caregivers to hear. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I want to thank you for coming on to the program today. It was very informational. We have just a minute left before we have to go. It goes by fast. Any last words that you'd like to share with caregivers?
I just would like to remind caregivers to take a moment and think about everything that they have done for their family member and give themselves some credit, a pat on the back, a self-hug, and acknowledge that what they have done for their family members is wonderful, and that they deserve to give themselves credit for
That's
that.
right. You're absolutely, I agree with you 100%. Thank you again, Dr. Knudsen, for being here. Thank you, audience, for tuning in. Glad you were here. Come back next week, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, give someone a hug because they need it and so do you. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on CareGiverSolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The opinions expressed on the